When Karoline Leavitt entered the showroom to ask about the opulent Azure coupe, salesman Blake Thompson gave her a sneer and laughed as he gestured to the exit, saying, "This isn't the place for MAGA folks like you, Karoline." Karoline was momentarily enraged and left with a resolute look, but the following morning in a fiery. When the back door opened and a crimson Rolls Royce Phantom parked up in front of the showroom, Blake paused, his eyes widening in shock since he never saw this coming. Karoline's husband, Nicholas Rio, appeared prepared to confront him before launching into the story comment section. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the most recent stories. Karoline Leavitt, 27, the youngest White House press secretary in history under the Trump administration, entered the Capitol Luxury Motors dealership in Washington, D.C., following a demanding day at the White House. Dressed in a white button-up shirt, black dress pants, and low heels, she exuded a polished, yet laid-back look in her NZ style. A delicate MAGA necklace around her neck subtly indicated her conservative views. Not only did Karoline need a new car for work, the Azure coupe was a bold statement against the left-wing media that was always criticizing her and the president. This upscale dealership in the center of Washington, D.C. catered to the political elite with shiny Porsches, Bentleys, and Ferraris behind glass, but underneath the glamour was a staff of liberal lead in management who had little affection for the MAGA crowd. Karoline confidently walked through the glass doors, holding a phone and pushing open the Capitol Luxury Motors entryway. A tiny bell rang as she entered the large room that was illuminated by LEDs. Luxurious automobiles with lights, the air smelt of fresh leather and pricey cologne as a flaming red Porsche 911 Turbo, a shiny black Bentley Continental, and a blazing yellow Ferrari SF90 were placed on a showcase pedestal. A young voice spoke up as she scanned the showroom and found the Azure coupe, a midnight blue masterpiece with sharp lines that cost $285,000. It was the perfect car for her needs, one that was both powerful and elegant enough to transport her from the White House to press briefings. Daniel, a new hire who was about 25 years old and wore a somewhat baggy suit, came up smiling shyly. "I'm interested in seeing that Azure coupe." Karoline pointed at the car and spoke in a calm but forceful tone. Before he could finish, a figure said, "I'll take it from here." Daniel nodded and began to explain. "It has a V8 engine, hand-stitched leather interior perfect for." The sales manager, Daniel Lake Thompson, was a tall, broad man of about 40 who wore a pricey gray suit. His eyes shone with smugness, and he was a fervent liberal. Instead of being curious, Blake used his tie to measure Karoline from head to toe. He said hello, his voice brimming with phony kindness. "What are you looking for?" "I would like to see the Azure coupe." "My name is Blake Thompson, and I am the manager here." Karoline continued to ignore his gaze. Blake stepped between her and the automobile with a sly smile. "Are you certain that this is a limited edition that only a select few can purchase?" His voice was slightly mocking. "I know what it is. I want to see the inside." Karoline scowled a little. Blake sneered and crossed his arms, saying, "You look familiar. Hold on." He tilted his head, and his eyes brightened as though he had finally deduced that you were Karoline Leavitt. His emphasis on Trump was like a curse, according to Trump's press secretary. Getting up, attracting the attention of adjacent clients, Karoline nodded, her face unchanging. "That's correct. I need this car for work." "If you mean rushing to press briefings to defend outmoded practices," Blake smiled at the harsh noise that reverberated throughout the showroom. "I assumed that you were only skilled at discussing tariffs and that your fantasies about expensive vehicles were unrelated to border fences." He turned to wink at Daniel, who bent his head in a plainly uncomfortable but silent manner upon hearing that MAGA is also skilled at playing fancy. Karoline remained upright, her voice calm. "I'm not dreaming. I want to purchase it today. Could you please show me the vehicle?" The SMB persisted after Blake stopped laughing, so he moved closer and leaned down as though he were speaking to a young listener. "Leavitt, miss, this is capital. However, I'm not sure where you receive your money. Probably MAGA donations. Unlike ostentatious conservatives, Luxury Motors caters to customers with taste and social consciousness. You mean turning down clients because of politics? I need a car to do my job well, not to satisfy you or anybody else." Karoline repeated her tone, slightly tightening it. Blake effectively and unflappably shrugged alongside Trump. "I don't think you look well in this car. Will you use it to enhance his brand?" Karoline kept her usual composure when confronting left-wing reporters, despite clenching her fists. "I'm a customer, I have money, and I want to see the car. That's all." Blake stepped back, staring at her as if she had said something ridiculous. Like, "You're seriously coming in here with that outfit and that cheap necklace? Who do you think you are?" Won the Azure A Coupe. Among the whispers, a couple beside the Ferrari turned to face two other salesmen, one of whom chuckled. Stood, Daniel eyes on the floor, still obviously wanting to disappear, crossing his arms. Blake dared her to look at him. "Leavitt. Miss, I don't have time for MAGA antics, so if you want a car, schedule an appointment as any other person would. If not, I advise you to look elsewhere. Tesla would be better for the environment." Karoline looked him in the eyes and spoke, in a stern but quiet tone. "I don't require your recommendations. I'd want to have this vehicle." Blake Thompson stood in front of Karoline Leavitt in the Capital Luxury Motors showroom, his arms crossed tightly and his glare steely, as though he was protecting his turf. Whispers from patrons and employees blended in with the subdued background music coming from the ceiling speakers. The midnight blue Oriole coupe continued to shine quietly on its pedestal, but the surrounding air felt heavy. "Don't you understand? This is my territory, and I refuse to let it." Blake said it again, dropping his voice and showing his disdain. Karoline, dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, stood erect and unflinching. Her eyes were as sharp as when she addressed left-wing reporters at the White House. "Your turf," she said in a calm but serious tone that had been honed from national TV sparring. "I thought this was a dealership, not a political club. I have money. I want to buy the Azure Coupe. What's your reason for refusing me?" Blake let out a brief, dry laugh that sounded like a slap. "You're really asking that look at you, that cheap MAGA necklace, that attitude like you own the world, you're Trump's people, and we don't welcome your kind here," Blake said. Karoline scowled, but she maintained her composure. "My money is as good as everybody else's in this showroom, so you can't turn me away just because you don't like Trump." Blake moved in closer, lowering his head till it met hers. His breath was tainted with sour coffee. "Oh, I can miss Leavitt," he said. "This is a private business. I choose who gets served, and I don't want dirty MAGA money to taint this place." The whispers in the showroom became more intense. Trump's press secretary responded to a middle-aged man in a blue suit whispering to his wife. "Who is she?" "Next to the Bentley. I've watched her on television." While Blake was teaching her a lesson, another salesperson with bleached blonde hair smiled and whispered to a co-worker. A few paces away, holding a pamphlet, Daniel, the young worker, stood blushing with shame but was too scared to step in. Karoline inhaled deeply, her tone tightening. "You're disrespecting millions of Americans by not serving me, dirty money, and discussing the money I make from my work as their representative." Turning to the tiny gathering, Blake shrugged. "Listen now, everyone." He bellowed, his voice like a performer on stage as he walked across the showroom. "Miss Leavitt here wants to buy our cars with MAGA money. I bet she would put a Trump flag on it and parade it around Washington, D.C. Do we need clients like that?" There were some giggles coming from the corner, and the man next to the Bentley nodded while his wife covered her mouth. However, not everyone was in agreement. What's wrong with an elderly woman in a grey jumper frowning? She just wants to buy a car. This isn't your place, regardless of whether you're a press secretary or whatever. "Get out now," Blake said, ignoring her, and turned back to Karoline while gesturing to the glass doors. Karoline refused to move. "I'm a consumer, not a troublemaker, so you can't legally eject me." Blake moved so close that she could see the furrows on his forehead. "I don't like you, that's enough. This is my turf and I say you don't belong. Leave or I'll call security," he said, pointing more intently at the door. The audience fell silent as Karoline, full of defiance, looked at Blake and then at the curious faces around the showroom, some smirking, others uneasy. She knew she could call a lawyer to turn this into a lawsuit, but not right now. Her voice was low but clear, ringing like a warning. "You want me gone, I'll go, but this isn't over." She turned to head for the glass doors, her heels clicking steadily on the marble floor, Blake laughing loudly behind her as she said hello to. "Give me an electric automobile, Trump. It's more up to date." More laughter ensued, but Daniel lowered his head and said, "This isn't right." As Karoline pushed the door and sunshine came in, illuminating her little but unwavering figure. Her fingers held onto her phone, pressing her lips together tightly. The glass door closed behind Karoline, the little chime ringing again like a period on the drama that had just transpired, but it wasn't the end. The showroom buzzed with whispers as Blake strutted back to his work. Blake believed he had won, because he had just defeated the maggot crowd, but he didn't realize Karoline was leaving with a plan. A quiet fire smoldered inside Karoline Leavitt's old sedan, a silver Toyota Camry with faded paint, as she pushed open the door and slid into the driver's seat. The late afternoon sun was dimming outside Capital Luxury Motors, but her hands were gripping the steering wheel and her eyes were fixed through the windscreen, still hearing Blake Thompson's sarcastic laughter. "Buy an electric vehicle. It's more up to date." She inhaled deeply, grabbed her phone out of her black dress pants, made contact and dialed the number. It rang twice before a deep, somewhat raspy voice said, "Karoline, you okay, Nicholas?" Her voice was steady but low. Nicholas Rio, 59, who had been homeless before transforming Rio Enterprises LLC into a multi-million-dollar real estate empire in New England, wasn't easily enraged. But when it came to Karoline, he reacted angrily, asking, "Who dared do that to you?" His voice was raised with rage. "I just got kicked out of a dealership in D.C. in the end." Nicholas Rio's husband went silent for a moment. As Karoline pulled out of the lot, the car's engine hummed softly. The manager, Blake Thompson, recognized me because Trump's press secretary had refused to sell me a car because I was MAGA, calling my money dirty and saying I didn't belong there. She recalled the incident in a calm but frustrated tone. "I needed the Azure Coupe for work so I could go between the White House and meetings. But he made fun of me in front of the entire dealership." What did Nicholas say when he abruptly stopped talking on the phone? It sounded like wind rushing through the receiver. Karoline reiterated Blake's remarks from the Trump jabs to the last challenge. "Get out, or I'll call security." She came to a stop at a red light, tapping the wheel with her fingers. I argued that my money was just as good as everyone else's. But he didn't care, and expelled me using his private business rights while making fun of the president as a bastard. Nicholas whispered. His voice now clearly infuriated Karoline, who knew her husband well enough to know that Nicholas wasn't just a successful real estate mogul who had fought his way up from nothing to own millions of dollars in property from sleeping on park benches in Hampton Beach, smiled faintly when she heard the creak of a leather chair he had likely stood up, pacing their suburban D.C. home office. A few months after their son Nicholas was born, he proposed to her. When Nico Robert was born, he vowed to protect his family no matter what. His voice replied, "Who does he think he is insulting you like that?" Rising, "You serve as the president's spokesperson at the White House, and he deems your money dirty. Does he realize how hard you work?" In order to demonstrate his superiority, Karoline merged onto the highway, the city lights flickering in the distance. "He doesn't care about Nicholas to him. I am everything, and he despises Trump McGah. After a brief period of silence, Nicholas asked, "What do you want me to do?" Karoline pursed her lips, considering her options. She could file a lawsuit, post it to conservative media, or let it go, but she wasn't the kind to let go. "I don't want revenge," she said slowly, "but I want him to realize his mistake. He believes I'm weak because I'm a young woman who supports Trump. I want him to understand that his liberalism doesn't give him the right to trample people." With a deep, serious laugh, Nicholas said, "Okay, I know what to do." "Why do you mean that?" Karoline scowled. He said, "Just head home." He replied, "Tomorrow I'll go there." He won't forget the day Karoline heard him walking, possibly to the garage where the $15 million Rolls Royce Phantom, a deep red color that reminded her of McGah, sat waiting for Nicholas. She warned him not to overdo it, even though she knew he rarely listened. "You're Karoline Leavitt, and nobody has the right to treat you disrespectfully. I simply want to let him know how foolish it was of him to meddle with my wife. I want to hear all the specifics later, but don't worry," Nicholas added, "I'll tell you everything. Now go home. Nico is waiting for you." Karoline laughed softly for the first time since leaving the dealership. Karoline Leavitt drove her old silver Toyota Camry home, its headlights sweeping across the suburban streets of Washington, D.C. The faint hum of the engine blended with her thoughts about the call she had with her husband, Nicholas Rio, saying, "Tomorrow, I'll go there. He won't forget that day His voice was full of resolve. Karoline smiled faintly, her hand brushing the MAGA necklace, but she was still weighing her feelings. She had been humiliated in front of the Capitol Luxury Motors showroom by Blake Thompson, not only because she was Trump's press secretary, but also because he believed she didn't belong. Nicholas wanted to retaliate, and she knew he wasn't joking when she turned onto the road that led to their two-story suburban home, a modest villa that was much less ostentatious than the multi-million-dollar properties. New Hampshire was owned by Nicholas. When the car was parked in the garage, the light from the living room shone through the drapes. Nicholas was seated in a leather chair in the tiny office with his eyes fixed on his phone and a drink of whiskey in his hand when Karoline went inside and kicked off her heels. His hair was a little disheveled from working on Rio Enterprises, LLC, and he was wearing a plain gray shirt. Real estate project drawings were all over his desk, but as soon as he heard her say, "You're back," he looked up. Nicholas exclaimed, standing tall and broad, his deep brown eyes sparkling with wrath and worry. At the age of 59, he still had the rough build from his difficult Hampton Beach days. "You're okay. Nico is sleeping upstairs." Nodding, Karoline sank down the couch across from him. "Although everything is well, the dealership is still on my mind." In order to demonstrate the superiority of his liberal beliefs, Blake not only declined to sell me a car, but also sought to embarrass me. Because he despises Trump, Nicholas believes he is more noble than you. He put the glass on the table and said, "I'm not letting this slide easily." His knuckles whitened. "I told you I don't want revenge. I want him to see his mistake not be ruined," Karoline said, tilting her head. She recognized Nicholas's wry smile from when he proposed in New Hampshire, and he laughed. He gestured for her to accompany him to the office door tomorrow, and "I'll show you what I'm using. I'm not purchasing the dealership to fire him, though I could." As they followed him down the dim hallway to the large garage in back, Karoline's lights flicked on, exposing the $1.5 million Rolls Royce Phantom. Beast's custom beige leather upholstery, shiny chrome wheels, and deep red paint job evoked the MAGA flag. "After Nico was born, I had it custom made last year, and tomorrow I'm taking it to Capitol Luxury Motors so he can see what he rejected. It's not a joke." Nicholas slapped the hood with pride. Karoline glanced at the automobile and then at her husband. "Nicholas, do you have any plans? Don't make this a problem." He stepped closer and put a hand on her shoulder without flexing, shaking his head. I will go there, purchase the Azure coupe you desired, and inform him that he was wrong to treat you disrespectfully because he believes you are not welcome in his world. I will also show him where Karoline's lips squeeze together outside his small bubble, but if you simply buy the automobile, he'll believe he won, and our money won't alter his perspective. I'll take him to a veterans fundraiser gala you're giving next month, where he'll have to confront the people he hates and realize their true value. That's how I'll teach him not to beat his fists." Nicholas grinned, his eyes glimmering. "You're smarter than I give you credit for." "I have to be to keep up with you," Karoline said, laughing and feeling lighter for the first time that day. Nicholas said, bringing her into his arms and lowering his voice, "You messed with the wrong person. Karoline, I once slept on park benches, but I discovered that a person's value isn't determined by their appearance or beliefs. I'll be the one to teach him that." She nodded, leaning into him for a moment, and then asked, "Sure, absolutely," he said, letting her go and stepping to open the car door tomorrow. "I'll be there. You don't have to come. I'll take care of it. You'll enjoy hearing how it turns out." Karoline turned her gaze from him to the blazing. "The red automobile is fine. Under the garage lights. I require all the specifics." Nicholas smiled again and nodded. As the deep red Rolls Royce Phantom, valued at $1.5 million, slowly rolled up to the dealership's entry, a small throng gathered outside the door, some clutching phones to photograph the event. Morning sunlight streamed over Washington, D.C., glinting off the glass walls of the Capitol Luxury Motors. A deep, powerful rumble echoed, whispering within the showroom, "What a car." Someone huge must be inside. Blake Thompson, who was still smudged from pushing Karoline and Leavitt out yesterday, was standing beside the Bentley Continental, straightening his gray tie and talking to a wealthy client. He believed he had given the MAGA gang a lesson. When the Rolls Royce door opened, Nicholas Riccio emerged, tall and commanding at 59, with a fitted dark grey suit, salt and pepper hair, and a sharp gaze that befitted someone who had created an entire real estate empire out of nothing. The fiery red car behind him was more than just a means of transportation. It was a statement echoing the MAGA flag that he and Karoline held in high regard. When Nicholas closed the door, the tiny chime within the dealership's glass entrance sounded, but it was muffled by the abrupt silence that filled the space. When he noticed Nicholas, Blake's smile went to ice. Customers and staff stopped chatting and stared at the man who had just arrived. Daniel, a young employee, was standing next to the reception desk, saying to a co-worker that the car was serious. Blake stepped forward to block, clearing his throat while attempting to maintain his composure. "Nicholas, hello, sir. My name is Blake Thompson, and I work as a sales manager. What can I do for you today?" His eyes moved to the Rolls Royce outside with a frightened flicker, but his speech was suave. Nicholas halted Blake's movement from head to toe, his eyes cool but stern. As his booming voice echoed throughout the store, he introduced himself as Nicholas Riccio. "Yesterday, you declined to sell Karoline Leavitt's husband a car. I'm here to discuss her relationship with Trump because of that." Blake's mouth appeared to short-circuit as he blinked, opening and closing. The man next to the Bentley murmured as whispers sounded through the crowd, and the press secretary's spouse and wife nodded, indicating that he was a true tycoon. Blake forced a crooked smile back into his face. "Mr. Riccio, I'm afraid there is a misunderstanding. We didn't turn anyone away." Nicholas simply interrupted him, saying, "Don't lie, you called her money dirty. Said she didn't belong and kicked her out in front of everyone. I'm not here for excuses. I'm here to buy the Azure CP she wanted." He pointed to the midnight blue car on the pedestal, his eyes never leaving Blake's. "Yes, of course we can," Blake said, swallowing hard as he tightened his tie. He paused when he realized he sounded too eager, but I must ask, are you serious about purchasing the Azure coupe today? It's a limited edition, so not just everyone can get one. Nicholas cut in once more. I'm not asking for your opinion, but I want to buy it because my wife needs it for press conferences at work. I'm approaching Blake, looming over him. You rejected her because you claim to despise Trump at White House events, but you have no idea who I am, or who she is. Mason Richard, the owner of the dealership, Richard Mason, was worried as he emerged from the back office at approximately 50, drawn by the noise. He was wearing a navy suit and had silver hair slicked back. Nicholas's tone remained the same. Your manager insulted my wife. I'm here to repair that. Blake stammered when he tried to hop in Mr. Riccio's car, and he embarrassed her in front of customers by refusing to sell her a car over politics. We simply give socially concerned clients priority. I didn't aim to upset them. Nicholas averted his socially conscious glare, believing it is noble to dismiss a woman who speaks for millions of Americans. You don't know anything about Karoline, who served as Trump's intern and congressional representative before becoming the youngest press secretary in history, while you are merely a car salesman acting as a judge. In an attempt to calm things down, Richard held out a hand. Riccio, Mr. I apologize for any confusion this may have caused. You want Azure, and we don't want to lose clients. I will deal with it directly. Although Nicholas nodded, his gaze remained icy. I still haven't finished with him, but I want the papers completed today. He gestured at Blake, who was already pale. You thought you had won by evicting her, but you will pay the price. Blake took a step back, his voice trembling. Nicholas grinned, but it was a cold smile. I don't mean to ruin you, but you'll see that. Liberalism doesn't give you the right to treat others disrespectfully. The Capital Luxury Motors showroom went quiet, save for Blake Thompson's labored breathing that pierced the opulent space as he turned to Richard and told him to get the automobile ready. Nicholas, with his piercing eyes fixed on Blake, who had just gone pale at the words, Rio stood erect in his grey suit and said, You'll see the consequences. Outside the glass doors, the deep red Rolls Royce Phantom remains. Drew looked at the audience, but everyone's attention was on the stalemate. Mason Richard. In an attempt to maintain a steady voice, the owner dabbed at his perspiration with the sleeve of his navy suit. Rio, we will immediately resolve the Azure issue. I really apologize for yesterday's incident with Miss Litt. Nicholas's nodded eyes on Blake. I need the papers finished today because my wife needs the car for press conferences at work, White House activities. She is too busy to engage in trivial ideological games. I'm not just here to buy a car. You insulted her, and I'm not going to let it go easily. He walked towards the midnight blue azure coupe on the pedestal and ran his fingers along its hood before turning back to Blake. Richard sliced his hand in Ms. Rio, but I promise that this won't happen again. Blake was about to explain himself when Nicholas interrupted him, calling her a troublemaker and kicking her out. I never made judgments about people's views, but I did sleep on park benches once when I had nothing. I have the right to choose. Consumers, Blake said, taking a step back while his eyes flitted between Nicholas and Richard. You think you're better than her because you're progressive and don't know anything about her, from Trump to congressional candidate to the youngest press secretary ever, and you're a car salesman who believes he can determine who's worthy. Nicholas's dry laugh reverberated throughout the showroom. There was complete silence in the crowd. Daniel, the youthful worker by the desk, muttered to a co-worker, He's right. His eyes wide. Blake's voice was shaking, and he reddened. You don't understand that we don't want maggot ties. Nicholas interrupted him once more. His eyes are piercing. If you don't want to, then why are you still here when I arrive in a Rolls Royce? You believe that my lack of social consciousness is sufficient to purchase your vehicles. Richard quickly advanced his voice, begging Mr. Rio, I apologize on Blake's behalf. We'll sell the Azure at the best price without any additional fees. He pointed out the area where the red beast gleamed in the sunlight. I built Rio Enterprises from scratch, own property across New England, he said. My wife and I don't need to prove anything to you, but you'll learn a lesson today. Nicholas stopped him with a raised hand, saying, I'll buy it, but not to please him. I'm buying it because Karoline needs it. Where's the paperwork? Richard quickly nodded, telling Daniel to get the paperwork. While Blake stood, Daniel hurried away. Nicholas turned back to Blake with clenched, frozen fists, uncertain of what to do. His voice was firm but low. I could buy this business and dismiss you today, but you'll go to the Veterans Gala instead. Karoline is hosting next month, and you will volunteer to meet the individuals you hate and realize their true value, which will help you regain respect. The volunteer stammered and Blake blinked. I doubt that you will leave no opportunity for debate, Nicholas abruptly said. I'll make sure no customer wants to deal with you again. Your selection. Blake was silent, lowering his pale eyes to the ground. Richard interrupted. Daniel, I promise Blake will complete it. Where is the paperwork? Daniel ran up and gave Nicholas a stack of documents, which he examined and nodded favorably. I need Karoline to receive the automobile in a day. After quickly signing the documents and returning them to Daniel, Nicholas gave Blake one final glance. You believed that you had won by throwing her out, but you were mistaken. Being liberal does not elevate you above others. He turned to Richard when everything was finished. Richard acknowledged that the car will be delivered on schedule. Blake stood there, hands shaking, watching Nicholas and the Rolls Royce outside as customers spoke to each other, some nodding in agreement and others shaking their heads at Blake's arrogant demeanor. Nicholas nodded as he walked to the glass doors, his shoes clicking firmly on the marble floor. Pride had fallen apart just minutes after the Capital Luxury Motors incident. The Grand Hyatt Hotel in Washington, D.C. was ablaze with lights for Karoline Leavitt's Veterans Fundraiser Gala. The Grand Hall was decked out with American flags and MAGA banners, and hundreds of veterans, their families and conservative donors mixed together amid lively conversation, food-filled tables, patriotic music being played by a band, and a sense of pride in the air. With a sophisticated navy business dress and a microphone in hand, Karoline stood close to the stage, speaking with a group of former servicemen. Her eyes were bright as she thanked them for their service near the entrance, her delicate MAGA necklace glistening under the lights. Blake Thompson, wearing a simple black polo shirt and a volunteer badge instead of his expensive gray suit, pushed a wheelchair for a 30-something veteran named Tom, who had lost a leg in battle. Blake leaned down and listened as Tom led him to the buffet in a kind voice. I'll get you a drink. A month earlier, his countenance was full of smugness. Now there was a tinge of uneasiness. After working with the people he had previously disdained for weeks, Blake was beginning to change after Nicholas Riccio had compelled him to attend this gala. Karoline exited the stage, going towards Blake with her heels pounding steadily on the wooden floor and smiling faintly as her eyes met Blake's from a distance. Blake said in a tone that was calm but subtly humorous, I didn't think you would actually show up. Blake glanced up, halting the wheelchair for a moment. Flush Leavitt, he said. Your husband didn't give me much choice, he replied, adding that if I didn't, I wouldn't have any customers left. She nodded and looked at Tom, who grinned at her. Thanks for being here today, Tom, she said before turning back to Blake. So how is it feeling working with these people? She asked. Blake paused, his eyes falling to the ground, and then he sighed. No, I used to think MAGA was all showy, clueless types, but after a few weeks here meeting people like Tom, I was wrong. They're not the enemy I imagined. Karoline crossed her arms and gave me a stern but kind look. You were incorrect to accuse me of being political. You called me disgusting, Blake, and I was kicked out of the dealership because I support Trump. However, a person's value is determined by how they treat other people, not by their political views. With a gradual nod, Blake's voice became quieter. Even though I told Mr. Riccio I was sorry when the car was delivered, I want to tell you straight out that I was mistaken. For once, Miss Leavitt smiled softly and without sarcasm, saying, "There's no excuse for how I treated you," Tom added. "You've learned something that's enough." And Blake seemed happy. "He helped me shoot baskets yesterday, Miss Leavitt, and he was still a little awkward, but Blake chuckled for the first time since coming to the gala, and his eyes brightened. "I'm learning that you're a tough coach, Tom. Tall and wearing a black suit." Nicholas Ritchie appeared from behind. His hands were in his pockets, and he put one on Karoline's shoulder as he looked at Blake. His eyes were not as cold as they had been at the dealership when he worked here, but he was trying, he told his wife before turning to Blake and asking, "Is this gala your thoughts?" "No, sir. I assumed it would be all flash, but now I understand that it's about community and people like Tom." MAGA was about Blake. With a nod, Nicholas said, "Good. I was worthless when Blake slept on the streets, but I've since learnt that value comes from deeds, not from appearances or opinions. You were wrong to treat Karoline disrespectfully, but I appreciate that he paused and added that my business needs some new cars. If you continue to change, I'll let you handle that situation." Blake blinked, shocking you, smirking, "Mr. Rio Nicholas. It's up to you, Karoline, but I don't make jokes about business. The Azure service is good and provided on time with no problems. However, next time, don't let politics interfere with your work." Blake gave a nod. "Sincere, I won't thank you, Miss Leavitt and Mr. Rio." As the dinner continued with music and laughing, Blake wheeled Tom back to the buffet, his expression softening somewhat. The story of Karoline Leavitt and Nicholas Rio at Capital Luxury Motors, where personal beliefs frequently clash with community values, is a great reflection of the political and social polarization in the US today. In the 2025 setting, Karoline, White House press secretary, was denied the Azure coupe by Blake Thompson simply because she was MAGA, a conservative symbol, and he hated this incident. Karoline and Nicholas lingered watching, thinking he's really changed. She asked Nicholas, who laughed, "Maybe, but if not, I'll remind him that you're the most important thing to me. The fact that private establishments, such as coffee shops or restaurants, occasionally deny service due to political beliefs, echoes contemporary realities and sparks discussions about free speech and private property rights." While Karoline and Nicholas represent the tenacity of conservatives refusing to be biased and using action, such as the fiery red Rolls Royce and the MAGA Gala, to prove their worth, Blake represents a segment of progressive Americans who believe they are superior, but actually engage in the very intolerance they criticize in others. The lesson here isn't just to not judge a book by its cover, but rather to learn to listen with respect, rather than letting politics dictate your decisions. Cloud judgment. Work with veteran Tom transformed Blake. The gala's recognition that human worth surpasses classifications like progressive or MAGA. When faced with disagreement, Nicholas provided Blake the opportunity to make peace by offering him the automobile deal. You can also choose to talk rather than fight and use acts to prove your value, like Karoline driving the Azure around Washington, D.C. If you liked the story of how Karoline and Nicholas taught Blake a lesson about respect above politics, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any more motivational tales like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video with another MAGA. Remember that polarization doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. Travel.